The story begins on October 7, 1989, when a meteor shower streaks across space toward Earth, with a small spaceship nestled among the debris. At the same time, Lionel Luthor, a wealthy businessman, is en route to a Smallville factory via helicopter, accompanied by his 9-year-old son, Lex. During the flight, Lex expresses a fear of heights and is quickly reprimanded by his father. Relief only comes when they land. Meanwhile, Jonathan and Martha Kent, a young farmer couple, head into town to visit Nell Potter, a florist looking after her 3-year-old niece, Lana Lang, while the girl's parents attend the Smallville High homecoming game. As Jonathan buys flowers, Martha makes a heartfelt wish for a child. On their way back, they encounter the homecoming parade celebrating another victory by the Smallville Crows. As the meteor shower nears Earth, Lionel meets with Dale and Bill Ross, owners of the Ross Creamed Corn Factory, discussing a potential land deal. Lex, uninterested in business matters, wanders into Riley Field and hears a mysterious cry for help. There, he discovers 14-year-old Jeremy Creek tied to a cross, victim of a football team prank known as the Scarecrow Ritual. Suddenly, a meteor crashes into the cornfield, creating a massive shockwave that engulfs Jeremy and Lex. Back in town, chaos erupts as meteors pelt Smallville. One strikes near Lana's location, killing her parents instantly. The onslaught leaves destruction in its path. Jonathan and Martha's truck flips from the blast, and amid the wreckage, they discover a naked young boy. A black spaceship nearby confirms he is not human. They decide to raise him as their own and name him Clark. 12 years later, Smallville becomes known as the meteor capital of the world. Clark Kent, now 14, is a freshman at Smallville High. He uses his super speed to research articles about superhumans and pleads with his parents to let him play football. But Jonathan refuses, fearing Clark might harm some. After missing the bus, Clark races through a cornfield and secretly hops on top of it, arriving at school before his friends Pete Ross and Chloe Sullivan. When questioned, he gives a weak excuse for his early arrival. Chloe asks Pete to the homecoming dance just as friend, while pretending not to have a crush on Clark. Clark wants to avoid being this year's Scarecrow and is reluctant about joining the football team. At school, he approaches Lana, but collapses in pain from her green meteor necklace. Lana helps him up, only for her boyfriend, Whitney Fordman, to arrive and assert dominance by tossing Clark's book at him. Jeremy Creek, unchanged in age since the meteor shower, breaks into the school, steals a photo of his tormentors, and begins seeking revenge. Meanwhile, 21-year-old Lex Luthor returns to Smallville to oversee the Luthor Corp fertilizer plant, built where the Ross factory once stood. He sarcastically thanks his father for the promotion. During football tryouts, Clark watches Lana practice with the cheerleaders. He fantasizes about being quarterback, but snaps back to reality when Pete appears in football gear. Clark later walks alone, stopping at Loeb Bridge. Lex, distracted by a phone call and sharp debris from a truck, loses control of his car and crashes into Clark, sending both into Elbow River. Clark rescues the unconscious Lex and revives him. Lex, shocked that Clark survives the crash, introduces himself to Jonathan Kent, who refuses to shake his hand. That night, Clark sees Lana give Whitney her meteor necklace for good luck. Unaware, it makes Clark physically weak. At Frank's auto shop, Jeremy approaches one of the former football players, electrocuting him into a coma as revenge for the Scarecrow hazing years ago. The next day, Clark returns home to find a new truck, a gift from Lex. Jonathan refuses to let Clark keep it, reminding him of Lionel's manipulative past. To prove he is different, Clark demonstrates his inhuman strength, prompting Jonathan to reveal the spaceship they have hidden in the storm cellar. Clark is shaken by the truth of his origins. Needing space, Clark goes to the cemetery and speaks to Lana, who confides that she often talks to her parents there. They share a moment of connection, both orphans in their own ways. Lana mentions she is going to the dance with Whitney, but offers to save Clark a dance. Later, Clark returns the truck keys to Lex, who guesses Jonathan disapproves of him. Lex asks if Clark thinks he is like his father. Before leaving, Lex shares that during the crash, he has a vision of himself flying and expresses hope for a friendship between them. Meanwhile, Chloe and Pete uncover more information about Jeremy, who escapes from a coma during an electrical storm. They discover he is seeking revenge on those who have hazed him. Clark, troubled by the revelations, sees a picture of young Lana from the day of the meteor shower and realizes he is indirectly responsible for her parents' death. Guilt-ridden, he leaves abruptly. In the parking lot, Whitney and his friends ambush Clark, forcing him to wear Lana's kryptonite necklace and tying him up in Riley Field as the Scarecrow. Jeremy, witnessing the cruelty, decides the hazing needs to end for good. Clark pleads to be released, but Jeremy intends to stop the cycle of abuse by electrocuting everyone at the homecoming dance. Lex passes by Riley Field, hears Clark's cries and frees him. Clark flees and confronts Jeremy at the dance. When Jeremy attempts to electrocute him, Clark remains unharmed and manages to throw him away from the sprinkler system. Jeremy retaliates by driving a truck at Clark, only to crash into a water main and short-circuit himself. As his powers fade, Jeremy ages to his actual 25 years and loses his memory. Clark tells him he is safe in Smallville, and Jeremy says he just wants to go home. Afterward, Clark sees Lana and Whitney crowned as homecoming royalty. Frustrated, he sees their truck stacked on top of two others, a prank likely from Clark. With a satisfied grin, he super speeds away. At the Kent barn loft, Jonathan joins Clark, who gazes through his telescope. Clark admits he is glad the Kents have found him, but Jonathan corrects him, saying Clark has found them. After the homecoming dance, Lana Lang returns home and prepares for bed, only to discover a mysterious box in her room. When she opens it, a swarm of butterflies is released. Outside, Greg Arkin, a classmate with an unhealthy obsession with Lana, secretly records her from a tree. At his own home, Greg's mother discovers another videotape of Lana, leading to a heated argument in which she threatens to send him to military school. Greg, an insect enthusiast, attempts to release his insect collection by loading it into his car. However, he hits a bump, causing a jar to shatter. The bugs swarm him and begin biting him relentlessly. In the chaos, Greg crashes his car and screams as the insects continue their attack. The next morning, his mother finds the insect cages empty and her son stuck to the ceiling, covered in web-like material. Meanwhile, Clark Kent dreams of flying into Lana's room where she blames him for everything. He wakes up hovering above his bed and crashes down. When he tells his father, Jonathan admits he does not have the answers, but assures him they will deal with it together. Later at the farmer's market, Clark confronts Whitney Fordman about the scarecrow prank, but Whitney dismisses it as a joke and asks for Lana's necklace. Clark doesn't have it. Greg approaches Lana at the market, pretending to need help with a school project. Lex Luthor, also present, notes Clark's interest in Lana and brings up the previous night in the cornfield. Greg ambushes Whitney in his truck, causing an accident. The Kents arrive at the scene, and Clark saves Whitney from an explosion. Although both are covered in flames, Clark is unharmed, shocking his parents. Lana, returning from horse riding, encounters Lex at the stables. She reminds him they met years ago in Metropolis, where she witnessed him skinny dipping with a girl. Lex notices her necklace in a photo and connects it to Clark. He advises Lana to ask Whitney where he was before the homecoming game. At the Arkin house, Greg's mother returns to find the home unnaturally hot and web-covered. Greg tells her his new insect instincts are guiding him to eat, molt, and mate, and cryptically mentions the pharaoh spider's lethal nature. Lex presents Clark with Lana's necklace in a lead box, unaware of its meteor rock origin. Clark, weakened by its presence, refuses it, but Lex encourages him to use it to win Lana's heart. At school, Lana confronts Whitney about the prank and her necklace. He admits he lost it, and she walks away, telling Greg she is busy when he approaches again. Lana visits Clark's barn and apologizes for Whitney's behavior. She admires his loft, calling it his fortress of solitude. Clark doesn't return the necklace. Meanwhile, Greg molts and attacks Clark at the barn. Jonathan is nearly killed, but Clark saves him. Clark confesses his guilt about Lana's parents and the strange events in town, but Jonathan blames Lionel Luthor's unsafe business practices. He assures Clark that guilt is part of being human. Chloe discovers an article about tribesmen gaining insect trait and theorizes Greg's transformation was due to meteor rock-infected bugs. She, Clark, and Pete investigate Greg's house and find his mother's corpse, insect skins, and a video of Lana. They realize Greg plans to target Lana. Greg kidnaps Lana and defeats Whitney at the barn. Clark arrives and learns Lana was taken to Greg's old treehouse. While Whitney rushes there, Clark speeds off. At the treehouse, Clark finds Lana in a cocoon. He battles Greg, and the fight moves to the Creekside Foundry, where meteor rocks weaken Clark. Using the Foundry's lead to protect himself, Clark catches Greg off guard and throws him into machinery. Greg is crushed, and insects scatter from the scene. Whitney rescues Lana, and they leave together. Coach Walt Arnold, known for his intense leadership and impressive record, is approaching his 200th win with the Smallville Crows. After their latest game, he relaxes in his private sauna, gifted to him 5 years prior by the Alumni Association. Unbeknownst to him, the green-tinted steam emanating from the lava rocks hints at exposure to meteor rock. Meanwhile, Principal Quan discovers that 7 football players cheated on their math midterm, making them ineligible to play. When Coach Walt asks him to delay any action until after the season, Quan refuses. In a fit of rage, Walt slams his desk, causing it to ignite. Chloe's article in the Smallville Torch exposes Coach Walt's abusive behavior. Lana is disappointed that Whitney knew about the cheating and remained silent. When a football player retaliates against Chloe by aiming a ball at her head, Clark intervenes and throws it back with surprising force, catching Walt's attention. The coach invites Clark to join the team, and Clark agrees. At home, Jonathan refuses to support the idea, worried that Clark's powers could accidentally harm someone. Clark insists on making his own decision. At Luther Mansion, Lex is pressured by business advisors to downsize the Smallville plant. Despite its poor performance, Lex proposes expanding the workforce to boost productivity. Dominic Sanatori objects, but Lex stands his ground, criticizing Lionel's outdated practices. Meanwhile, Lana quits cheerleading, frustrated with the team's lack of ethics. Though Nell offers her a job, Lana decides to find work independent. Clark begins football practice under Walt's watchful eye, impressing the coach but worrying Jonathan, who only attends to ensure no one gets hurt. Later, Quan tells Walt that a player confessed Walt provided the test in question. Quan plans to report it, prompting Walt to use his powers to ignite Quan's car. Clark and Pete witness the fire, and Clark saves Quan moments before the car explodes. At dinner, Clark tries to justify playing football by explaining how he controlled his powers. When he reveals that Coach gave him Jonathan's old position, Jonathan remains unimpressed. After Clark storms off, Martha urges Jonathan to trust Clark's judgment, reminding him that if they do not, Clark may leave by choice. At the beanery, Clark, Chloe, and Pete discover Lana working as a waitress. Chloe spots the suspended players and follows them. At the field, Coach Walt confronts them about the confession. Trevor Chappelle gives himself away and is attacked as sprinklers burst into flames. Chloe photographs the event. The next day, Lionel confronts Lex about his defiance, suggesting a fencing match to determine the plant's fate. Later, Martha advises Clark to take responsibility for his decisions, reminding him to also understand his father's fears. At the pep rally, Coach burns Trevor again. Chloe's torch office is set on fire, and Clark rescues her. With no hard proof, they decide to find Trevor. Clark eventually finds Trevor hiding with fire extinguishers. Trevor confirms Walt's abuse and shows his burn. Clark confronts Coach in his sauna, but is overpowered and locked inside. Jonathan finds and saves Clark, who then confronts Coach on the field. In a final burst of rage, Coach burns himself to death. Later, Lionel chastises Lex for defying him, while Lex defends his strategy as more effective. Clark reconciles with Jonathan, and on the empty football field, he and Lana share their mutual struggles, finding solace in letting out their stress with a scream. At the Smallville Savings and Loan, a person appearing as Lex Luthor demands to close all accounts and withdraw the funds in cash. The bank manager becomes suspicious when the signature does not match the records and asks for identification. In response, the imposter pulls out a gun and flees the bank with a bag full of money. As alarms blare, the disguised figure runs into Clark Kent, who questions the situation. The imposter throws Clark through a shop window, and as Clark recovers, he experiences a sudden headache and discovers he can see the person's skeleton glowing green. At home, Rose Greer confronts her daughter Tina about a backpack full of cash. Tina morphs into Lex, claiming the robbery was done by Lex. When Rose demands the money be returned, a struggle ensues, and Rose falls down the stairs to her death. Tina begins to call for help but ultimately decides not to report the incident. Meanwhile, the Kents read about the robbery. Clark insists Lex could not be responsible, but Jonathan is more skeptical. When Lex arrives to discuss the accusation, he explains that he has a solid alibi from Metropolis. Clark maintains the robber looked exactly like Lex. In gym class, Clark's X-ray vision activates again, allowing him to see through Pete and even into the girls' locker room, where he accidentally sees Lana. He later tells his parents about his new power, and they advise him to practice control, though Clark grows frustrated. Tina visits Lana and asks hypothetically if Aunt Nell would adopt her, making them sisters. Lana, disturbed by the question, tries to reassure her. Later, while running errands with Martha, Clark sees someone with a glowing skeleton enter the antique store. Inside, they meet Rose, who lies about Tina's whereabouts. Martha sees cash on the floor and becomes suspicious, especially after being nearly run over by her own truck, seemingly driven by Clark. However, the real Clark appears just moments later. At the farm, the Kents piece things together. Martha recalls Tina's past bone disease and the strange recovery after the 1989 meteor shower. Clark suspects the glowing skeleton indicates Tina has been affected by the meteor rocks. Lex encounters journalist Roger Nixon, who attempts to blackmail him over past events at Club Zero. Nixon demands $100,000 or he'll publish the story. Meanwhile, Lana finds her mother's diary and is disheartened to learn her mother disliked cheerleading and longed to leave Smallville, contradicting everything Lana believed. At school, Clark uses his X-ray vision on Tina and later sees her locker filled with cash. He informs his parents, and soon after, deputies arrive at the antique shop looking for Tina. She disguises herself as Rose just before they enter. When Lana visits Clark and kisses him, she morphs into Tina and attacks, believing he tipped off the police. Lana seeks help from Chloe to locate her mother's graduation speech. Chloe learns it was withheld for being controversial. Clark and Pete return to the antique shop and discover Rose's skeleton in a cabinet along with pages filled with Lana's forged signature. leading them to conclude Tina plans to impersonate Lana. Disguised as Lana, Tina takes Whitney's jacket. At the cemetery, she appears as Whitney and attacks Lana, telling her she does not deserve her light. Tina steals Lana's meteor necklace and locks her in a crypt. When Clark arrives and sees Whitney, he fights Tina. Freed from the necklace's effects, when Tina removes the jacket, Clark regains strength and overpowers her. He then finds Lana alive in the crypt. Later, Clark's parents assure him Tina will no longer pose a threat. Whitney comforts Lana as Clark watches with X-ray vision, feeling pain at the sight. Finally, Chloe gives Lana a copy of her mother's graduation speech, which she listens to and finds deeply moving. At Crater Lake, Clark Kent and Chloe Sullivan attend a student party where meteor rock fragments contaminate the area. Lana Lang is with Whitney Fordman, and Sean Kelvin tries to impress Chloe. Although she gives him her number, Chloe admits it was only to brush him off. Sean, meanwhile, treats her as just another conquest and joins Whitney in tossing a football. When the ball lands on the ice, Sean walks out to retrieve it, but he falls through and drowns as the water freezes over him. The next morning, Sean resurfaces from the frozen lake and approaches a campfire. His skin is blue and icy, but as he warms up, his color returns. However, once he leaves, the fire freezes over, revealing that he now absorbs heat. At school, Sean tells the nurse he feels cold despite a high temperature. When she touches him, he draws warmth from her, improving his condition but leaving her with chills. Meanwhile, Martha Kent is worried about the farm's finances. Clark jokingly suggests becoming a pro athlete to help. Lex Luthor visits the Kent farm to invite them to a farming dinner. Despite Jonathan's initial reluctance, Martha persuades him to attend. However, when they arrive at the mansion, they realize they are the only guests. Later, at the beanery, Lex tells Lana she might be with the wrong guy. Whitney breaks a date, giving Lex the chance to encourage Clark to ask Lana out. He gives Clark tickets and a limo offer. Motivated, Clark successfully asks Lana out. Clark shares his excitement with Chloe and Pete, just as Sean arrives still hunched and cold. When Chloe turns him down, Sean moves on to Jenna Barnum, irritating both Chloe and Clark. At Jenna's home, Sean's condition worsens. When she invites him into the shower, the water turns to hail. In his desperation for warmth, he kisses her. Absorbing her body, Jenna freezes solid and shatters. Later, Sean calls another girl, Bella, who declines to meet. He attempts to light a fire, but it freezes. Remembering Chloe, he decides to call her instead. Chloe helps Clark pick an outfit for his date with Lana when Sean calls. Chloe agrees to meet him at the school's newspaper office. During the limo ride, Clark and Lana bond over books and telescopes. Meanwhile, news reports Sean is wanted for Jenna's death. Clark drops Lana at the beanery and rushes to the school. At the torch, Chloe follows a trail of petals to the pool, where Sean apologizes before trying to absorb her heat. She falls into the water, but Sean freezes it as she tries to escape. Clark arrives, saves Chloe, and fights Sean, who vanishes. Chloe's research reveals that Sean's brain cells responsible for temperature regulation may be damaged. At the beanery, Pete sees Lana and offers her the limo. Lana gives it to Pete and asks Whitney to take her home. On their way, Sean tries to stop them, causing their truck to crash. He heads to the Luthor mansion to warm himself using electricity. Clark finds the wreck and is attacked by Sean, who steals Clark's heat and escapes. Sean reaches the mansion, drains the generator, and is about to harm Martha when Clark intervenes. Sean warms up again by absorbing Clark's heat, but Clark throws him into a nearby pond, which freezes and traps him. Back at the farm, Lex expresses disappointment in Jonathan for taking a loan, but leaves the offer for help open. Chloe lights a candle at school in Jenna's memory. Clark tries to ask Lana out again, but she reveals Whitney's newfound jealousy won't leave her any free weekends. When Clark asks why she stays with Whitney, Lana says he makes her feel safe and is always there when she needs him. Clark Kent has been assigned to read to Cassandra Carver, a blind woman who claims she can see the future. Despite her blindness, Cassandra is highly perceptive and can identify her surroundings with ease. When Pete Ross visits her, he casually asks to have his fortune told. Cassandra initially resists but drops her book, prompting Pete to hand it to her. As they make contact, she tells him to check his pockets. He has locked his keys in his car. After Pete leaves, Cassandra tells Clark that someone close to him will die very soon. Clark later shares this vision with his parents, who do not seem overly concerned. Meanwhile, Lana Lang visits Harry Bolston, an elderly man in a wheelchair who has become obsessed with Smallville's history. He asks Lana to take him to the koi pond and requests that she fetch a scarf from his room. While alone, Harry attempts to light a cigarette but falls into the pond after dropping his lighter. The decorative lights and meteor rocks in the pond react, and Harry emerges young again. He laughs maniacally and retrieves newspaper clippings and lists, starting with Zoe Garfield, a waitress at the beanery. At the beanery, Harry, now young, observes observes Lana, Clark, and Chloe as they discuss his disappearance. Clark later visits Lex Luthor to deliver produce and mentions Cassandra's vision. Lex pretends to dismiss it but discreetly asks for her name. Back at the retirement center, Harry plays the piano. Cassandra tries to touch his hand to see his future, but Harry evades her. Lana informs Clark that Harry's real name is Harry Volt, who was convicted of murder in the 1940s for killing a teacher's son after being denied a scholarship. Clark visits Cassandra again and takes her hand, triggering a terrifying vision of himself surrounded by endless tombstones bearing the names of those he loves. He is deeply disturbed, interpreting it as a sign that he will outlive everyone and end up alone. At Jim Gage's house, the power goes out, and Harry appears disguised as an electrician. After confirming Jim's relation to one of the jurors from his trial, Harry strangles him with piano wire. Meanwhile, Lex visits Cassandra to ask about Clark but refuses to learn his own future. Cassandra, however, offers insight that Clark is unique and destined to help many people. Clark, Chloe, and Pete investigate Harry's past. When Clark sees a photo of Zoe Garfield, he realizes she is in danger and rushes to the beanery. Harry, revealing a vendetta against Zoe's grandmother, attacks her. Clark arrives in time to stop him. Later, Zoe is safe and Harry is hospitalized. Clark expresses concern that Cassandra may know his secret, and his parents advise him not to visit her again. Lex questions Clark about the incident at the beanery, but Clark says he remembers nothing. At the hospital, deputies arrive to arrest a suspect, only to find the aged Harry Bolston handcuffed to the bed. Harry had returned to the koi pond in an attempt to regain his youth. Later, Martha Kent is attacked by a young Harry impersonating a gas man. She hides in a grain silo, and as Harry finds her, she pulls a lever, burying them in grain. Clark and Jonathan arrive just in time to save her. Finally, Lex returns to Cassandra, ready to see his future. Upon touching her hand, Cassandra sees Lex in a white suit and black glove in the White House. Flowers wither at his touch, and a field of sunflowers transforms into dry bones. Blood rain pours as Lex raises his arms, seemingly embracing his destiny. Cassandra dies from the vision, leaving Lex visibly shaken and without answers. At her family's nursery, Jody Melville is working in the greenhouse, harvesting carrots grown in soil filled with green meteor rocks. Her father complains that she doesn't want his spaghetti, but she explains that she's on a strict vegetable-only diet to lose weight before Lana Lang's birthday party. He worries she's too obsessed with the event. At school, Jody is cutting out pictures of supermodels and pasting her own face over them when Chloe Sullivan and Pete Ross ask for help with algebra. They offer to buy her lunch and are introduced to her homemade vegetable drink. Dustin Crenshaw insults her weight, and Pete defends her. That night, after just one day on the diet, Jody sees dramatic changes. She watches her double chin disappear and loses 29 pounds on the scale. At the Luthor mansion, Lex finishes a physical. The doctor notes his high white cell count but rules out leukemia. Lex mentions he used to have asthma before losing his hair and never gets sick anymore. The doctor hints that many believe Luthor Corp's fertilizer plant may be polluting the environment. Lex later browses the Smallville torch site and finds Chloe's stories about Smallville's strange happenings. Meanwhile, Aunt Nell is preparing for Lana's party. While studying for math with Clark, Lana admits the party is too much. Whitney tells Lana he has a Kansas State football tryout and will miss her party. Back at school, Jody musters the courage to ask Pete to the party. Lana visits the Kent farm to deliver produce for the event, and Clark offers to escort her. Lana agrees, but makes Clark promise not to bail like last time. Later, Jody checks her weight again and loses another 27 pounds instantly. Though happy at first, she becomes overwhelmed with hunger and eats everything she can find. She realizes her shake is causing the problem and smashes it in anger. Driving in heavy rain while gorging on fast food, she hits a deer. Unharmed, she gets out and, after a grotesque transformation, devours the animal. Clark spies on Lana in his loft as Whitney gives her a birthday book. Chloe walks in and teases him. She then shares a news story about a dead deer found on Route 5, with the cause of death listed as unknown. Curious, she and Clark visit animal control and find the deer drained of 80% of its body fat. They joke about a fat-sucking vampire. At school, Clark sees Lex reading The Wall of Weird. Lex says he stopped by to support a new computer lab and became interested after hearing about Chloe from the plant manager. Lex hears Chloe's meteor theory and decides to visit Dr. Hamilton, a mineralogist selling plastic meteor chunks. He offers to fund his research, but Dr. Hamilton refuses. Jody begins feeling unwell at school. When Dustin mocks her again, she seduces him and later attacks him in the stadium. Meanwhile, Lana shares with Clark that she hasn't had a happy birthday since her parents took her to a drive-in at age 3. Clark hears a noise and finds Dustin in bad shape in the boiler room. Chloe later tells Clark that Dustin is in a coma from fat loss shock. They join Jody in the cafeteria, who is eating excessively. As Clark prepares for Lana's party, Chloe arrives with a repair order showing Jody's car was damaged, likely from hitting the deer. Pete picks up Jody, but she becomes sick and runs inside. When Pete follows her, she attacks and knocks him out. Clark arrives and chases her to the greenhouse. Surrounded by meteor rocks, Clark weakens. Jody nearly kills him, but sees her reflection and stops. In a rage, she damages a gas line, causing an explosion. Clark shields her and pulls her to safety as Pete recovers. At the mansion, Lana hides from guests. Disappointed Clark didn't show. Lex receives test results and gives Dr. Hamilton a $100,000 check, urging him to continue researching the meteor's effects on humans. In Metropolis, Belinda Jenkins puts her baby to bed, while her husband Earl, who is struggling with violent tremors, enters the room. As he gets closer to his son, he begins to shake uncontrollably, and the entire room shakes with him. Belinda returns, but Earl has already left. Outside, in the rain near Luthor Corp, Earl tries to take his medication but drops the bottle, ruining the pills. He rushes to the building and pleads with Will, the maintenance man, to let him in, claiming something went wrong at the Smallville plant. Will refuses, and Earl's shaking intensifies until he shatters the glass door. When Will helps him, Earl's violent convulsions break Will's neck. In horror, Earl runs off into the night. The next morning, Clark tells Pete and Chloe he's throwing a small party while his parents are away. However, the party becomes massive, with dozens of unknown guests. Lana arrives without Whitney, and Lex shows up with fireworks, claiming he arranged everything to ensure Clark's first party is memorable. Meanwhile, in Metropolis, Martha fails to reach Clark and talks to Jonathan about her mixed feelings about moving from the city. Later, Whitney arrives at the party and argues with Lana about her attending alone. Their argument is interrupted when the barn begins to shake. Clark investigates and finds Earl hiding under a tarp. Earl claims he's there to see Jonathan, but Jonathan is out of town. When Clark touches him, the effect is like touching meteor rocks, causing pain and green veins. An ambulance is called as Earl loses control again. At the hospital, Clark explains to Chloe that Earl used to work long hours on the Kent farm before moving to the Luthor Corp plant. While Clark speaks, Earl's tremors intensify again, sending people flying across the room, including Clark. Once calm, Earl collapses. The next morning, Clark returns home to clean up the party mess using super speed, but finds his parents are already home and disappointed. He tells them about Earl and how being near him made him sick. Clark and Jonathan visit Earl at the hospital. The doctor explains Earl is suffering from mineral poisoning, with tiny fragments embedded under his skin. Earl reveals that an explosion on level 3 of the plant 6 months ago caused his condition. He says the explosion happened while he was cleaning a secret area where experiments with a fast-growing fertilizer were being done. The level was sealed and Earl was moved to Metropolis, but the seizures began months later. Earl wants help to get back into the plant and find out what really happened. Coincidentally, Clark is heading to Luthor Corp's plant for a school field trip led by Chloe's father, Gabe. Earl escapes custody and sneaks into the plant during the trip. Searching for level 3, he finds a wall where an elevator used to be. Clark leaves the group and enters a restricted area, while the rest move on to the control room. Earl bursts in, takes hostages, and demands to see level 3. The plant is evacuated, and Lex allows Martha and Jonathan inside. Clark finds blueprints and tries to convince Earl that level 3 doesn't exist, but Earl refuses to believe it. Lionel Luthor arrives and Earl grabs a valve during a tremor. It snaps and injures Clark, but he's unharmed. The broken pipe begins leaking methane gas. Whitney tries to stop Earl, but fails. Lex offers himself as a hostage in exchange for the other's safety and promises to show Earl level 3. Clark finds the hidden elevator and informs Earl through the intercom. Earl takes Lex to the spot and is shocked to find the elevator real. Inside, the third button activates. They descend and find the remains of the secret level. Earl remembers the green mist used in the experiments. Suddenly, he seizes again, and the catwalk begins to collapse. Clark arrives, pushing through the pain caused by Earl's condition. He saves both Earl and Lex from falling, dragging them into the elevator just as the structure collapses. Earl's truth is finally confirmed, but not without cost. At the charity gala held in the Luthor Hall collection at the Metropolis Museum, Clark Kent and Lex Luthor admire a jewel-encrusted piece of armor once belonging to Alexander the Great. The armor features red and blue gems and a serpent shaped like an S on the chest. Lana Lang is also at the gala and invites Clark to join her and Whitney Fordman, but Clark steps outside to get some air. Meanwhile, outside the museum, Detective Sam Phelan is seen assaulting a man and ranting about his file at Internal Affairs. As Clark walks down the steps, a bus veers out of control when the driver suffers a heart attack. Clark uses his powers to stop the bus just before it crashes into a sleeping man at a bus stop. The bus crumples around him in a fiery explosion, but Clark remains unharmed and quickly vanishes. Phelan arrives at the scene and suspects that Clark was involved. The next morning, Clark helps his father lift a large generator into the rafters of the barn. He tells his parents about what happened in Metropolis. Back in the city, Phelan blackmails a guard into giving him surveillance photos from the gala. He focuses on an image showing Lex and Clark together. At the Luther mansion, Lex has breakfast with Victoria Hardwick, who proposes a deal that could help him get revenge on his father. At Smallville High School, Chloe Sullivan is excited about her latest editorial, but Principal Kwan shuts her down for focusing on Smallville's weirdness instead of actual school events. He removes her as editor of The Torch until a replacement is found, and Lana offers to help. Later, Lex runs into Phelan at the Beanery and quickly makes it clear he despises him. When asked about Clark, Lex lies and says he doesn't know who the boy in the photo is. At the Kent farm, the generator crashes down from the rafters, but Clark saves himself easily. Phelan reveals himself and demands Clark's help with an unspecified task. Clark refuses and is disturbed by the threat. He tells his parents, and Jonathan decides to confront Phelan the next day. That night, Lex visits Clark and warns him that Phelan is dangerous. The following day, Jonathan meets with Phelan at the Beanery. Phelan refuses to explain what he wants and threatens to expose Clark. Jonathan loses his temper. At school, Lana shares that Principal Kwan has reinstated the paper, but with her as the new editor. Though she insists Chloe will still be in charge, Chloe feels betrayed and storms off. Meanwhile, Lex suggests a power move to Victoria, take over both Luther Corp and her father's company. In Metropolis, Phelan finally reveals what he wants Clark to do: break into an internal affairs officer's apartment and steal his file. Clark uses his powers to find and open the safe, but instead of handing over the file, he drops it onto Phelan's car from 5 stories up and flees. The next day, Clark lies to his parents about the previous night. Deputy Ethan Miller shows up with a warrant, and a dead body is found in the barn. Jonathan is arrested. When Phelan returns to the farm, Clark loses control and nearly injures him. Later, Clark visits his father in jail and admits to everything. At the Beanery, Clark declines Lex's help. That night, Phelan forces Clark to go with him to steal a breastplate from the museum. They disable security and Lex follows. Clark uses his powers to break into the case, but instead of handing over the artifact, he throws it to the guards. Phelan, furious, fires his gun, but Clark dodges it. When the guards return, Phelan shoots again and they kill him. The next day, Jonathan is released. Clark reassures Martha that no one saw him. At school, Lana faces consequences for her editorial but successfully defends it. Kwan reinstates Chloe as editor if she sticks to facts. Chloe apologizes, and their friendship begins to heal. Lana Lang is excused from gym class while she chairs the American Red Cross blood drive, even though she once fainted at the sight of her own blood. Meanwhile, Troy Turner grabs Amy Palmer's notebook to see if she's writing about him, but discovers that it's filled with writings and drawings about Lex Luthor. Amy's brother, Jeff Palmer, steps in to help. The Palmers live and work at the Luthor mansion. In the locker room, Clark Kent feels slightly sick as an invisible attacker passes by and knocks Troy out with free weights. Clark and Pete rush in, but the attacker slips away, only briefly visible in the steam. Later, Clark tells Chloe about the attack. At the Beanery, Lana and Whitney are seen arguing. Lana then tries to get Clark and Chloe to sign up for the blood drive, but Clark avoids it by volunteering to pass out cookies instead. At the Luthor mansion, Amy serves Lex and Victoria Hardwick. She clumsily spills drinks on Victoria, who suspects Amy did it on purpose. Amy rushes home upset, believing Victoria wants Lex all to herself. Her mother reminds her that they don't belong to Lex's world. In Amy's room, it's revealed she has Lex's rare watch, featuring a Napoleonic franc. At the Kent farm, Martha Kent asks Clark about the blood drive. Jonathan reminds him that he cannot donate. Clark later visits Lex to deliver a large order of white tulips. Suddenly, the flowers fly across the room without warning. Clark tells Lex he's decided to pursue Lana, and Lex shares that he's searching for a watch his mother gave him before she died. Clark uses his X-ray vision, but can't find it. When he checks the library, he sees Victoria using Lex's computer. Just then, they hear banging from upstairs and discover Victoria's room has been vandalized. Chloe adds the event to her wall of weird. Lionel Luthor arrives in Smallville to scold Lex about Victoria staying at the mansion. That night, Clark helps Lana with the blood drive and manages to avoid donating by claiming fear of needles. They share a quiet moment, but Aunt Nell interrupts just before they kiss. Clark invites Lana to watch the sunset from his loft. The next day, Clark uses his X-ray vision to spot a prescription in Whitney's bag. Later at the Beanery, Amy tells Clark she saw Victoria going through Lex's thing. Clark warns Lex, but Lex already knows and seems indifferent. Clark also tells Lex that Amy is obsessed with him, but Lex shrugs it off as a harmless crush. Later that night, Victoria is attacked by an invisible assailant in the bathtub. Clark rescues her just in time. Using his X-ray vision, he sees a skeleton fleeing the scene and finds some green goo and blood at the site. Clark brings a sample of both to Chloe. The goo smells like roses, and when Chloe rubs it on her fingers, they disappear, then reappear when wiped off. They suspect a connection to Amy and decide to compare blood types. Clark speaks with Whitney, who reveals his father is seriously ill, but he doesn't want Lana to worry. Lex later tells Clark that Victoria has gone to Metropolis until the attacker is caught. Clark admits he's rethinking pursuing Lana, feeling it would be unfair due to Whitney's situation. When Amy approaches, Clark uses X-ray vision and spots Lex's watch on her wrist. Lex and Clark search Amy's room and find a shrine to Lex and his watch. Lex doesn't call the police but insists the Palmers leave that night and offers to pay for Amy's medical care. Clark finds Lana in his loft watching the sunset. He tells her Whitney needs her. Meanwhile, the Palmers are packing when Jeff, now invisible, attacks Lex. Chloe rushes in to tell Clark that the blood sample matches Jeff, not Amy. Clark speeds to the mansion. Jeff has Lex bound and explains he attacked Victoria for Amy. Jeff used oil from a strange green rose to make himself invisible. Clark fights him, eventually knocking him into paint cans that expose his position. In Metropolis, Bob Rickman meets Paul Hendricks from the Center for Environmental Protection. Paul raises concerns about Bob's plans to build a new plant in Smallville due to contamination caused by his previous one. A restraining order prevents Bob from building more plants until his legal cases are resolved. However, during a handshake that glows green, Bob persuades Paul to jump from the window and end his life. As Bob leaves the building, Paul carries out the act. Meanwhile, Clark, Chloe, and Lana go horseback riding. Chloe struggles with riding and drops her camera. While retrieving it, Lana encounters Kyle Tippett, a sculptor living alone in the woods. Kyle flees when Clark arrives. Back home, Clark reviews Chloe's camera footage with his parents. It doesn't look like Kyle meant any harm, but Lana's aunt insists Clark should report him. Clark decides to speak with Kyle himself. In Smallville, Bob Rickman hosts a reception announcing plans to build a pesticide plant on the Kent farm. Lex doubts the Kents will sell. At Kyle's trailer, Kyle tells Clark that he was checking on Lana after her horse threw her off. He's cold and distant. At the beanery, Clark informs Whitney and Lana of his talk with Kyle, but Whitney is unhappy Clark didn't take stronger action. Lex warns Clark that Bob is targeting his farm. Later, Kyle confronts Bob and reminds him of their agreement to stay away from Smallville. As Kyle exits the building, he meets Clark and explains that he filed a complaint against Bob. Whitney appears and threatens Kyle, but Clark offers Kyle a ride home. Outside, Bob shakes Whitney's hand, activating his power. Clark later finds Whitney's truck in the woods and returns to check on Kyle. Whitney, under Bob's influence, is attacking Kyle. Clark intervenes, and the police arrive to arrest Kyle. Clark doubts Whitney's story. The next day, Chloe investigates connections between Bob and Kyle. Lana criticizes Clark for not supporting Whitney, and Clark reminds her of Whitney's past action. Bob visits the Kent farm to convince Jonathan Kent to sell. At first, his handshake fails due to Jonathan's gloves, but later he succeeds. Jonathan ends up holding a signed contract without understanding how it happened. Clark meets Lex, who offers help. Clark then visits Kyle for answers about Bob's influence. Bob contacts the sheriff, sending a deputy to deal with Kyle. Under Bob's control, the deputy shoots at Kyle, but Clark saves him with super speed. Kyle is wounded in the shoulder. Clark takes him to Lex's mansion, where Dr. Toby treats him without question. Later, Lana finds Clark in his loft. She wants to maintain their friendship despite their disagreements. Bob approaches Lex at the beanery, but Lex avoids shaking hands. Clark confronts Bob and resists his handshake, nearly crushing Bob's hand. Chloe discovers that Bob and Kyle were exposed to meteor radiation during the shower and became supernaturally persuasive. Clark and Chloe visit Kyle again. He confirms that their persuasive abilities began after the meteor shower. He demonstrates by making Chloe kiss Clark, then she forgets it happened. Bob visits Lex and tries to shake his hand. Clark warns Lex that Kyle is ready to expose Bob. Lex agrees to help, but betrays them by locking Clark and Kyle in a car and setting it on fire. Clark escapes with Kyle before the car explodes. Rickman arms Lex and sends him to kill Clark. At a garage, Lex shoots at Clark, and despite dodging many bullets, Clark is hit and collapses. He recovers enough to kick Lex, snapping him out of the trance. Bob prepares to enter but is intercepted by Kyle. During a handshake, Bob dies, defeated by Kyle's stronger persuasion. At home, Martha tends to Clark's bruises. Lana visits to say their friendship matters more than disagreements. Lex later tells Clark the company is withdrawing from the Kent farm deal. He remembers nothing and reassures Clark that their friendship will become legendary. During a geology field trip, Smallville High students search for specific rocks. Eric Summers, a quiet and shy student, offers to help Holly find a meteor rock, but her boyfriend threatens him. The situation is broken up by Mr. Summer, the geology teacher and Eric's father, who then scolds Eric for not collecting enough rocks. Feeling dejected, Eric walks away. When everyone boards the bus, Eric is missing, so Clark Kent volunteers to find him. Clark finds Eric standing on Smallville Dam as a thunderstorm rolls in. While holding a bag of rocks that includes a meteor rock, Eric is nearly struck by lightning and begins to fall. Clark grabs Eric's hand to save him, and lightning hits Clark directly in the chest, passing through to Eric. A green cloud surrounds them during the event. After pulling Eric up, Clark accidentally burns his hand on Eric's coat, showing that something has changed. The next day, Clark struggles to help Jonathan Kent with the truck and realizes he has lost his powers. When he falls and gets a nosebleed, Martha takes him to school. Meanwhile, Eric discovers he no longer needs glasses and shows signs of superhuman strength. He stops his father from hitting him using super speed, leaving Mr. Summers stunned. At school, Clark is noticeably weaker and sweating after simple exercises. He questions Eric about any changes, but Eric only admits to feeling great. Alone, he effortlessly bench presses 600 pounds. Later, Whitney tells Lana he's struggling with school and work at his father's store. They are both shocked to see a for sale sign at the flower shop, which also includes the Talon Theater. Lana is upset that her Aunt Nell never told her. Roger Nixon brings a report to Lex at the Luther mansion. He claims that Lex hit Clark on the bridge during the accident, but Lex warns Nixon to keep that information private. Clark continues to struggle with chores on the farm, admitting how hard regular work is without his powers. When Lex visits, he notices Clark's change and questions him, leading to an argument. Clark challenges Lex to hit him with a hammer if he suspects something. While walking through town, Chloe is robbed. Eric stops the thief, shattering a knife against his hand and throwing the man 30 feet. Chloe writes about him in the paper, calling him a superboy. The Kents realize Eric has Clark's powers. Clark, feeling lost, is told by Martha to enjoy life while he can. Clark starts to relax and joins a basketball game with Pete. Although they lose badly, he enjoys himself for once. In Metropolis, Lex confronts Sir Harry Hardwick about their business deal. Harry reveals he bought Cadmus Labs and plans to take over Luthor Corp. Lex learns he was set up and decides to retaliate. Later, Clark meets Lana at the Talon and learns how much the place means to her. She lends him her English notes and comments on how relaxed he seems. Eric, excited about his newfound fame, expects his parents to be proud, but they are scared and plan to send him to doctors. He runs away, later threatening Holly's boyfriend and throwing Clark across a car. Holly calls him a freak and walks away. Clark is bandaged up and blames himself. Lex visits, but Clark lashes out emotionally. Eric returns home but finds his parents have called the sheriff. Feeling betrayed, he disappears. Jonathan tells Clark that Eric's parents are afraid. Clark wonders if his dad was ever afraid of him, but Jonathan says he never was. Clark then guesses Eric may also have his weakness. Lex tricks Harry and takes over his company. Meanwhile, Clark borrows Lana's meteor rock necklace and visits Eric at the dam. Eric tries to destroy his powers, but during the fight, Clark uses the necklace and a live wire to trigger the return of his abilities. His wounds heal, and Eric is taken away in an ambulance. Lex later learns from Nixon that Lionel used Victoria to set him up. Though Lex tells Nixon to leave the Kents alone, the photo of Lionel with Victoria deeply saddens him. At the Luther mansion, Clark helps Chloe with an interview by operating the video camera. During the session, 3 masked men, Wade Mahaney, Derek Fox, and Scott Bowman, walk straight through the walls and enter the vault. They steal cash, coins, artifacts, and a disc. On their way out, they attack Clark and throw Chloe from a 4th-story window. Luckily, she lands in grass and survives, but Clark feels helpless for not reaching her in time. At the Smallville Medical Center, Clark waits beside Chloe as Lex arrives, bringing in top doctors from Metropolis. Chloe has a concussion and a broken arm. The police suspect these men are behind several other robberies, but Lex does not report anything stolen. He is only concerned about finding the ones who hurt Chloe. At the Kent farm, Clark vents his anger by splitting firewood with his bare hands. His parents reassure him that he is not to blame and urge him to look into what happened. Clark visits the bank and uses his X-ray vision, spotting a human arm lodged inside the vault door. Meanwhile, Lana talks to Whitney, who appears depressed. Later, at the Talon, Lana confronts Aunt Nell about the building's future. Nell reveals she sold it to Lex, which disappoints Lana. At the gang's hideout, Wade is frustrated that their heist didn't make the news. Derek suspects Lex didn't report the robbery because of the stolen disc. When they check it, they find evidence that Lex is stealing from his father to fund a secret particle accelerator project. They plan to blackmail him and realize their tattoos, which give them powers, are wearing off. They decide to recruit someone new. At the mansion, the gang returns and demands Lex pay them $1 million or they'll leak the disc. At Fordman's store, Whitney tells Clark he lost his Kansas State scholarship. Wade overhears, introduces himself, and invites Whitney to a party. At the party, Wade convinces Whitney to get a tattoo with meteor rock ink. Later, the gang pushes Whitney in front of a truck that passes right through him. Back at the medical center, Chloe is awake. Clark still feels guilty, but she uses sarcasm to lift his mood. She remembers one attacker had an octagon tattoo. Clark goes to Fordman's to ask Whitney about it and notices his new tattoo. tattoo. He warns Whitney to stay away from those guys, but Whitney refuses to listen. Lana meets with Lex at the Talon and pleads with him to renovate the theater. Lex declines, planning to turn it into a parking garage. Later, she meets Clark at his loft. Clark shares the news about Whitney's lost scholarship and suspects the gang members were once athletes before things went wrong. Lana believes Lex might not have rejected her idea outright, but rather challenged her to offer a better plan. That night, the gang picks up Whitney while Clark secretly follows. They meet Lex in a meat locker, but he hasn't brought the money. When the gang threatens Lex, Whitney panics. Clark arrives, weakened by the meteor rock in their tattoos, and gets hit with a meat hook. Before losing consciousness, he calls Whitney's name as the gang vanishes. Back at their loft, the gang argues about Whitney's future in the group, but their need for new blood means keeping him around. Meanwhile, Chloe and Pete meet Clark and share theories about how the gang walks through walls. Whitney later confesses the gang's plan to kill Lex. Together, he, Clark, and Lana decide to retrieve the disc. Clark and Whitney sneak into the gang's loft. Clark finds the disc using his X-ray vision but is discovered. He crushes the disc, prompting Wade to attack him. The gang drags Whitney outside and prepares to crush him with a junk car. Lex arrives just in time and tases Wade. Clark recovers, saves Whitney, and Wade gets crushed as his powers fade. Scott runs but is caught by the sheriff. As the police arrest Scott and Derek, Lex warns them to keep quiet about everything, or he'll make sure they regret it. Lex Luthor is hanging upside down in a straitjacket, trapped in a dark room while Jude Royce shines a light in his face and accuses him of lying about the past. 3 years earlier in Metropolis, Lex visits Club Zero with his bodyguard Max Kasich and friend Amanda Rothman, who is engaged to Jude. Amanda spots Jude at the club with other women and, feeling betrayed, throws her ring at him. Jude believes Lex intentionally brought Amanda there and confronts him. A fight breaks out, and Jude stabs Lex in the shoulder. Max pulls out a gun and shoots Jude, killing him. In the present, Lex remains suspended while Jude prepares to shoot him, accusing Lex of being the true killer. A week earlier, Mr. Austin assigns a biography project to the students. Pete gets Stan Gibson, Chloe is assigned Clark, and Clark is to write about Lana. Clark meets Lana at the Talent, where Jude Royce has applied for an assistant manager position. Jude warns Lana about Lex's bad influence. When Lex arrives and learns Jude applied for the job, he gets upset and leaves. As he starts his car, he hears the same song that played the night Jude died. Clark uses his X-ray vision to find a hidden CD player under the dashboard. Clark returns home and finds Chloe interviewing his parents about his adoption. She asks difficult questions, leading Clark to meet Lana in town to clear his mind. At the Talon, they discover the contractor unconscious and a box on the table with Lex's name on it. Inside is Max's severed hand, identified by his distinctive ring. At school, Chloe continues digging and learns that Clark's adoption was managed by a charity that only handled one case, his. Clark becomes furious and confronts her. At the mansion gym, Lex receives a report that Max never reached Metropolis, and Jude has no living relative. Amanda Rothman is still missing. While exercising, Lex flashes back to the night at Club Zero. After Jude's death, Sam Phelan arrives and Lex tells him that he and Max struggled for the gun when it discharged. Sam promises to cover it up, giving Lex the contact of a doctor to treat his injury quietly. Back in the present, someone presses a gun to Lex's head, Jude Royce. Clark arrives and scares him off. Lex refuses to talk about Club Zero. On the Kent farm, Clark helps his father and brings up the adoption mystery. Jonathan vaguely references needing higher access to get answers. They then find all their cattle dead, and the Center for Environmental Protection arrives, with Jude posing as one of their agents. He tases Lex and drives him to the abandoned Club Zero, restraining him in a straitjacket. Chloe apologizes to Clark and decides to drop the adoption investigation. She sees clippings on Club Zero in his loft and connects the man who died with one of the CEP workers. Hacking into the DMV, she finds a fake ID and sends the police to the listed address. Clark arrives to find the police and a body being removed. Using X-ray vision, he sees the corpse is Max, missing a hand. He asks about Club Zero's location and heads there. Back at Club Zero, Jude is about to kill Lex when Roy Rothman, Amanda's brother, shoots Jude instead. He frees Lex and reveals his true identity. Roy had been pretending to be the Talon's contractor. He blames Lex for Amanda's unthinkable act and explains he found a man who looked like Jude weeks after her funeral. Lex finally tells Roy that Amanda actually pulled the trigger during the chaos at Club Zero. Roy becomes enraged and prepares to shoot Lex, but Clark arrives in time. He saves Lex by breaking his fall and taking Roy down. Then he pretends to have just arrived, unties Lex, and they head back to Smallville. At the Talon's grand opening, Clark brings an old photo of the theater's original launch as a gift. Lex meets him there, and Clark quietly asks whether the story Lex told was the truth. James Beals is racing down the road with a large yellow flower beside him, urgently trying to contact Lionel Luthor. When his call is ignored, he becomes frustrated and speeds up. In his rage, he rams Jonathan Kent's truck and attempts to pass him on a narrow road. Beals loses control, crashes, and his car flips over. Jonathan pulls him out just before the vehicle explodes. As he drags Beals out, the strange flower sprays Jonathan in the face. Dr. Hamilton later informs Lex Luthor that Beals stole the flower while helping him move lab equipment. He explains the flower is a Nicodemus, a species thought extinct for a century. Using meteor fragments, he had successfully reactivated the flower's dormant seeds. Meanwhile, at the Kent farm, Jonathan begins acting unusually. When Clark arrives home, he finds his parents kissing in the kitchen. Jonathan grabs a beer and casually invites Clark to watch a football game, brushing off his farm chores and displaying reckless behavior. The next day, Clark tells Pete about his father's odd actions. Pete reveals his long-standing grudge against Lex due to Lex's father causing his family to lose their business. Chloe, conducting a poll for the school paper, asks about everyone's deepest desire. Pete jokes about wanting to make out with a beautiful girl, while Lana says she wants to climb the windmill in Chandler's Field. Back at the farm, Jonathan's erratic behavior continues. After getting a call from a loan officer rejecting his application, he grabs a shotgun and storms off to confront the man. Clark spots him heading into the bank and stops him. In their struggle, Jonathan fires the shotgun at Clark, who is unharmed, but then collapses. At the hospital, Jonathan exhibits the same symptoms as Beal, who has just fallen into a coma. That evening, Chloe and Lana investigate the accident scene. While Chloe takes photos, Lana finds a dashboard figurine. Suddenly, the flower rises from the ground and sprays her. Meanwhile, Lex confronts Hamilton about the flower. Lex has discovered that the flower caused a similar outbreak in 1897. A priest's diary blamed the Nicodemus flower for the settlers' strange behavior. Lex demands one flower be sent to Metropolis for study to find a cure for Jonathan. The next day, Lana arrives at school dressed provocative and tries to persuade Whitney to skip class. When he refuses, she seeks out Clark, drags him to the pool, strips down to her underwear, kisses him, and pushes him in. Clark later tells Chloe about Lana's odd behavior, and they link the infections to the accident site. They identify Dr. Hamilton in Chloe's photos and decide to question him, but he dodges their inquiry. At the Talent, Lex is on the phone when Lana walks in, dismisses the staff, and tries to seduce him. When that fails, she steals his car and drives to the windmill. Clark follows and catches her mid-fall. He rushes her to the hospital, where Jonathan has now slipped into a coma. Lex assures Martha that he'll do everything he can to help. At school, Chloe confirms Hamilton had the Nicodemus diary and a manuscript about a native cure, which Lex planned to send for analysis. Chloe and Pete sneak into Hamilton's lab, and Pete gets infected. He becomes aggressive, accuses Chloe of ignoring him for Clark, and threatens her with a gun before stealing her car. Meanwhile, Lex discusses the manuscript with Hamilton when Pete barges in, shoots Hamilton, and nearly destroys the cure. Lex saves the burning manuscript and throws it to Hamilton, who escapes. Pete then turns the gun on Lex just as Clark arrives. Clark pretends to side with Pete, shoves Lex to distract him, then disarms Pete at super speed and knocks him out. Lex gets up, and Clark explains it was an act to protect him. When Clark asks about Hamilton, Lex avoids the question. Ryan James tries to pawn a small angel figurine, claiming it is gold. Although the pawnbroker says it's fake, Ryan convinces him to raise the price by saying his mother has died. Moved by the story, the broker opens the safe. Across the street, Ryan gets into a car with his step-parents, James Gibson and Deborah Birch. Ryan gives them the combination, but asks them not to forget the angel. Armed with a shotgun and pistol, they enter the shop. Ryan is horrified when James shoots and kills the broker. He runs into the woods, chased by his step-parents, and is then struck by a car driven by Martha Kent. She rushes him to the hospital as James and Deborah arrive. At the medical center, Dr. Harden explains that Ryan only has minor injuries, but shows signs of earlier abuse. With no parents located, Ryan will be held in a juvenile cell. Clark suggests Ryan stay with them instead. The next morning, Ryan makes breakfast and surprisingly guesses how Jonathan and Martha like their pancakes, though not Clark's. Jonathan asks about the highway incident, but Ryan avoids the question and leaves the table. Clark later finds him reading Warrior Angel, his favorite comic. Ryan worries the Kents won't like him if they learn about his past, but Clark reassures him by playing basketball with him. At the hospital, James pretends to be a private detective searching for Ryan, but learns only that Ryan has been released. Meanwhile, Lex Luthor receives a visit from his father Lionel, who offers him a new position in Metropolis. Lex promises to think about. Clark takes Ryan to Chloe's office, where she compares Ryan's story to a folktale. Ryan surprises her by finishing the story with details she hadn't yet said. Afterward, he tells Clark that Chloe likes him and even picked out a pink dress for the school dance. They visit the Talent, where Ryan meets Lex and Lana. Ryan is rude to Lex and later tells Clark that Lex is leaving because Lionel offered him a job. When Clark tells Ryan to stop making up stories, Ryan sees James in the coffee shop and flees. He hides in a dumpster, which a truck begins to lift, but Clark saves him just in time. That night, Lex visits Clark and admits he once had a brother named Julian who died in infancy. He confirms Lionel offered him a job but says he hasn't made a decision. Later, at the Talon, Ryan warns Lana that one of her employees is dishonest. She later catches the employee stealing. Meanwhile, Chloe and Clark search the crash site and find Ryan's backpack, which includes a photo of him and his mother. At the farm, Ryan sneaks into the storm cellar and finds Clark's spaceship. He reveals he can read minds and confesses his mother died and his step-parents abused him and forced him to steal. Deborah returns pretending to be a social worker. She threatens the Kents and forces Ryan to leave. Lex, meanwhile, is abducted by James, who tries to steal his money. Ryan gives Lex his password, Julia, from his thoughts. After dumping Lex, James and Deborah take Ryan to a bowling alley to torch the limo and hack the account. When the password fails, James kills Deborah and chases Ryan. Clark arrives, uses his X-ray vision to find them, and saves Ryan by hitting James with a bowling ball. Ryan says goodbye to Lana and the Kents. Lex rejects his father's job offer, choosing to stay. Ryan's aunt arrives from Edge City to take him home. Before leaving, Ryan promises to keep Clark's secret safe. Tyler Randall visits his dying mother at the hospital. She begs him to help end her suffering and expresses a wish to be buried in Smallville. Tyler suffocates her with a pillow. As alarms go off, a nurse, a doctor, and security enter the room. During the struggle, Tyler falls out of a hospital window and dies. Later, the coroner finds a kryptonite fragment embedded in Tyler's wrist, removes it, and is suddenly turned to ash by Tyler, who comes back to life and walks out. Meanwhile, Martha and Clark arrive at Mobile Meals and meet Tyler, now volunteering under a new identity. They visit Mrs. Sykes, a bedridden woman in pain. She requests white roses for the next day. At the Luther mansion, Dominic Sanatori shows up, claiming to audit Lex. Later, he visits the Kent farm and questions Jonathan about Lex investigating the car crash and the Kent family. But Jonathan is unaware of the reason and becomes upset. Clark later meets Lex at the Talon, and they discuss his annual fishing trip with Jonathan. Lex offers Clark football tickets instead. Suddenly, Lana gets a call saying Whitney's father, George Fordman, has had another heart attack. Clark and Lana visit him at the hospital, though Whitney hasn't shown up yet. When Clark returns home and suggests going to the game instead of fishing, Jonathan suspects Lex is behind it and confronts Clark. The two argue about Clark's growing independence and Lex's influence. Later that night, Tyler visits Mrs. Sykes with a white rose and touches her hand. She turns to ash, and he kills her dog, Pepper, as well. The next morning, Martha urges Clark to reconcile with his father. At school, Chloe tells Clark about Mrs. Sykes' death, believed to be spontaneous combustion, and plans to investigate. Clark talks to Whitney, who admits he avoids visiting his father because he wants to remember him strong. Clark tells him having the person is more important than the memory. Chloe finds a Daily Planet article about a coroner who also turned to ash. They investigate Mrs. Sykes' home, finding no fire damage but discovering Pepper's tag in a pile of ash and a white rose in a vase. Lex visits the Kent farm and asks Jonathan about the game, only to get confronted about his investigations. Lex says he was honest with Clark. At Mobile Meals, Tyler tries to help Martha with vegetables, but they disintegrate in his hands. She realizes he killed Mrs. Sykes and tries to alert the sheriff. When Hank intervenes, Tyler kills him too. Clark arrives and protects Martha, but Tyler touches Clark's face. Clark briefly weakens but recovers and throws Tyler away. Later, Clark tells his dad that Tyler's heart wasn't beating. At the cemetery, Lana finds Whitney at the Langs' grave. After Whitney leaves, Tyler approaches Lana and says he wants to help Whitney's father. Chloe finds that Tyler's mother actually survived and returned home. Lana alerts Clark, who finds Tyler with Mr. Fordman. Clark saves Whitney and takes Tyler to his mother's house. Seeing her alive, Tyler realizes he's been trying to ease his own pain and turns himself to ash. That night, Lex drugs Sanatori and delivers him in a trunk to Lionel, warning him to stop interfering. Lionel seems proud. Finally, Lex arranges a scrimmage for the Metropolis Sharks in Smallville, giving Mr. Fordman a chance to see Whitney play. Chloe Sullivan and Pete Ross discuss the upcoming election for class president. Pete believes Sasha Woodman works hard, but follows others. Paul Chan is the most qualified, and Felice Chandler is likely to win because she is the most popular. Chloe mentions that the Torch will publish bios of all candidates, but as editor, she can endorse only one. That night, Paul is printing campaign flyers when bees swarm from the bathroom drain and sting him over 100 times. The next day, students hear about Paul's condition, and Clark notes that his chances are hurt since he can no longer campaign. Pete surprises Clark by entering him in the election. Although Clark is hesitant, Sasha confronts him, furious that he's running. Lex Luthor passes a woman with a broken-down car and stops to help. He figures out she's a journalist named Carrie Castle from the Metropolis Journal. She wants to protest profile him, but Lex refuses. Later, Clark tells his parents about Pete nominating. They support the idea. At the Talon, Clark finds it empty due to competition from the Beanery. Lana also supports his candidacy. Clark visits Lex for advice on saving the Talon, but Lex won't finance it. However, he gives Clark a campaign slogan. The next day, Clark's campaign kicks off with help from Lana and Pete, but Chloe criticizes Clark for having no clear stance on student issues. She challenges him, and Clark turns to Pete for help, who prioritizes shaking hands over speeches. Sasha grows angrier, and later rips down one of Clark's posters. At home, she places it in her shed, which is her campaign headquarters, filled with massive honeycombs and a bee swarm that forms her face. Clark later asks Chloe to help him with posters. She informs him that the Center for Environmental Protection found that the bees that attacked Paul came from various hives. When Clark sees the latest torch, he is shocked to learn Chloe endorsed Paul Chan. She defends her decision, but Clark is upset. At the Talon, Lana offers to help with Clark's speech, and Lex encourages her to keep fighting for the Talon. Sasha attempts to get Felice to drop out. After Felice refuses, she's later found in a coma, covered in bees. Chloe informs Clark and Pete, who realize Sasha might be controlling the bees, especially since she was stung the previous year in Schuster's Gorge, a major meteor site. When Sasha asks Clark to withdraw, he confronts her. At the Talon, while Lana helps with Clark's speech, a bee swarm attacks. Clark saves Lana and decides to stop Sasha. Lana encourages him to speak to Chloe, and they reconcile at Sasha's shed. They conclude Sasha has become the hive queen, and that if she loses the election, the bees may turn on her. Sasha visits Clark at the Kent farm and unleashes the bees on Martha. Clark saves her, and later confronts Sasha in her shed. The bees arrive, and Sasha insists she didn't summon them. Clark protects her and explodes the shed, destroying the bees. In the end, Paul Chan wins the election. Lex congratulates Lana after she exposes health violations at the Beanery, saving the Talon through her resourcefulness. Justin is preparing to return to Smallville after spending 5 months in the hospital due to a hit-and-run accident. His rehabilitation has not gone well, leaving his hands crippled. Once a talented artist, he now struggles to hold a pencil. The nerve damage is severe, and although doctors consider his recovery remarkable, Justin feels resentful. Drawing was the only thing he excelled at, and he believes it's been taken from him. He blames Dr. Wells, who has several malpractice suits filed against him. Though the doctor treats him kindly in person, he speaks disrespectfully about Justin to his wife in the elevator. Meanwhile, Justin, drawing a surprisingly accurate portrait of Dr. Wells, begins scratching out the hands-on. At that moment, the elevator plummets. Dr. Wells tries to escape but is killed when the elevator falls again, and Justin's telekinesis appears to be the cause. At Smallville High, the career fair is underway. Clark gets approached by the Air Force, and Pete joins the mayor's re-election campaign. Chloe is focused on securing one of 4 student positions at the Daily Planet out of over 500 applicants. She's furious when Clark forgets to register them for the journalism convention in Metropolis. Upset and feeling neglected, she lashes out and storms off. Pete tries to explain to Clark that Chloe has feelings for him and wanted to ask him to the spring formal. She was especially excited about spending the day with him. Justin returns to school and is warmly welcomed by Chloe, with whom he's been emailing for 6 months. Unfortunately, he cannot resume drawing comics for the Torch. He invites Chloe for coffee, and although she sees Clark watching, she agrees to go. Later, at the Torch, Justin tells Chloe he remembers part of the license plate from the car that hit him. Chloe eagerly offers to help investigate. Clark, now holding Lex's donated tickets to the conference, tries to make peace, but Chloe decides to go with Justin instead. Clark also notices a clipping in Justin's portfolio about Dr. Wells's elevator accident. Lana talks to Clark about Chloe. Clark admits he might have feelings for Chloe and felt jealous seeing her with Justin. Lana points out that sometimes the right person is in front of you all along. Justin tries to draw Chloe's portrait with his hands but fails. He then uses telekinesis to float pencils and chalk, creating a beautiful drawing. Lex, while visiting his mother's grave, meets Pamela Jenkins. Lex is cold toward her, believing she abandoned him. Unaware Lionel forced her out of his life. Pamela seeks forgiveness, but leaves saddened by Lex's anger. That evening, Principal Kwan dies in a staged accident. Justin, using telekinesis, impales him and crashes a car into him after believing Kwan was behind his hit and run. Clark suspects Justin and warns Chloe, but she dismisses it. Lex visits Clark and says if he doesn't make a choice between Lana and Chloe, he could lose both. Later, Chloe visits Justin's house and finds sketches of the murders. Realizing Clark was right, she quickly leaves, but Justin notices his sketchbook is disturbed. Chloe calls Clark from the Kent farm but is attacked by Justin, who throws her across the barn and knocks her unconscious. Just as he's about to kill her, Clark arrives and saves her, overpowering Justin Justin with his strength. Meanwhile, Lex confronts Lionel, who plans to sell Cadmus Labs. Lex reminds him of his legal rights and asks about Pamela. Lionel is wary, thinking she'll ask Lex for money due to her cancer. Lex visits her in the hospital, bringing a book she admired. Pamela expresses regret for staying away and tells Lex she's proud of who he's become. The next day, Chloe tells Clark that Justin is now in the psychiatric ward. They reconcile, and Clark invites her to the journalism convention. Chloe accepts, and their relationship begins to blossom. Lana watches them and appears hurt. When Whitney enters, she looks ready to break up with him, but he shares the heartbreaking news that his father has died. Lana Lang and Whitney Fordman are out horseback riding when a massive explosion occurs nearby. They rush toward the site and discover a gas line has erupted. Emergency crews are already present, but Whitney notices another line about to explode. He quickly warns the workers and everyone takes cover. The second explosion knocks Lana off her feet and she becomes covered with glowing green stones. Later that night, Clark visits the hospital where Lana is resting and Whitney is by her side. Chloe Sullivan stops by on her way to Metropolis for an internship interview at the Daily Planet. Though hesitant to leave because of Lana's injury, Clark convinces her that Lana would want her to go. As Chloe unlocks her car, Lana has a disturbing nightmare in which she kidnaps Chloe and wakes up in a panic. Meanwhile, Lex Luthor gives the Kents a check to compensate for damage caused by Luthor Corp chemical. Martha and Jonathan Kent find the amount excessive, but Lex insists it matches their loss. Later, reporter Roger Nixon informs Lex about a crop duster named Eddie Cole, who claims to have seen a spaceship during the meteor shower. They meet Eddie, who says he saw a meteor swerve over Miller's field. When he returned later, it was gone, and he suspects someone took it. Lex pays for the story but remains skeptical. The following day, Martha advises Clark to invite Chloe to the spring formal. At school, Clark struggles with the Torch newspaper as equipment fails and deadlines loom. Lana arrives, worried about Chloe due to her unsettling dream. Clark tries contacting Chloe all day with no luck. At home, Jonathan tries to calm Clark, assuring him Chloe will be fine. Jonathan also admits he is still considering Lex's check. At the Talon, Pete reveals he's going to the dance with Erica Fox. Lana again asks about Chloe. Suddenly, she is hit with another vision, this time of Chloe blindfolded, bound, and trapped in a creepy room filled with teddy bears. She also sees a masked face. At an amusement park, Chloe wakes up and manages to free herself, but her captor injects her with a drug, knocking her out. Gabe Sullivan arrives at the Talon, deputies Watts and Vertigo. Lana explains her vision, and while Watts listens seriously, Vertigo mocks her. They soon find Chloe's car abandoned in the woods. That night, Lana visits Clark in his loft. They talk about Chloe's disappearance and recall the first time they met. Suddenly, Lana has another vision of Chloe buried alive under a windmill at Chandler's Field. Clark rushes to the scene, uses his X-ray vision to locate Chloe, and pulls her coffin from the ground, saving her. Later, Clark and Lana visit Chloe in the hospital. She receives a call from the Daily Planet, who want to publish her story, but she chooses to write it for the Torch instead. As she recalls her experience, she breaks into tears and asks Clark to stay. After Lana leaves, she sees another vision of her kidnapper watching her. Clark stays the night and returns to the farm the next morning. Jonathan tells him they are accepting Lex's check. However, they find Lex excavating Miller's field. Jonathan becomes suspicious, especially since that's where they found Clark as a baby. Dr. Hamilton later uncovers a strange object in the field. Lex visits Clark to explain his obsession with the meteor shower and a man he met who claimed to see a ship. Clark listens but tries to deflect attention. Whitney brings military medals to the Talon, explaining they belong to his father and helped him reconsider his life path. Later, Clark tells Chloe and Whitney his theory that Lana might be psychically connected to someone from the explosion, possibly a deputy. They suspect Deputy Watts. At the Talon, Vertigo arrives to question Lana. She has a vision of Watts knocking Vertigo unconscious. When Chloe, Clark, and Whitney arrive, Lana is gone. Vertigo reveals Watts is working as security at the carnival. At the carnival, Lana wakes in the same room Chloe was held in. Watts enters and confesses his plan to kill her and take credit for solving the case. Clark arrives in time, deflects a bullet, and pursues Watts. Watts tries shooting Clark but fails, and Clark knocks him into a booth. Deputies arrive and take Watts down, ending Lana's final vision. The next day, Chloe tells Clark she landed the internship at the Daily Planet after her article was published in the Smallville Ledger. Clark nervously asks her to the spring formal, and she happily agrees. Lex waits at the helipad for his father's arrival, unaware of the visit's purpose. Lionel surprises everyone by announcing the immediate closure of the Luthor Corp plant due to alleged management problems. Lex is furious, realizing this is just another way for Lionel to force him back to Metropolis, where he can can be watched closely. Meanwhile, at school, Clark is trying to figure out his tie and cummerbund. He tells Lana about asking Lex to borrow his limo for the spring formal. Chloe arrives and breaks the news that the plant is being shut down. Clark later shares the information with his parents, but they have already read it in a special edition of the Smallville Ledger, the first since the 1989 meteor shower. They begin to argue about what caused this and who is responsible. Elsewhere, Whitney surprises Lana with a picnic and reveals that he is enlisted in the Marine Corps. He says the only thing he'll miss is her and asks if she'll wait for him. Lana is uncertain. At the Luthor mansion, Clark notices the missing piece of his ship on Lex's desk. Lex is frustrated about being blamed by his father for the plant's shutdown. Clark decides not to ask for the limo after seeing how preoccupied Lex is. At the Torch, Chloe tells Clark her father may move them back to Metropolis. That night at the Talon, Clark shares Chloe's news with Lana. Lana then tells Clark about Whitney joining the Marines. They wonder what life will be like when Chloe and Whitney are no longer around. Lex later meets with the plant's senior management and unveils a bold plan to attempt an employee buyout. The next day, while Clark is working on the farm, his truck explodes just as he turns the key. Although unharmed, Clark is confused, and Roger Nixon is revealed to be filming the whole thing. Jonathan believes it might have been a fuel line problem. Clark, however, says he barely felt the heat or impact, suggesting he's becoming stronger with age. As Lex reads an email, Lionel enters and mocks his plan, warning him that he now owns Smallville Savings and Loan and can foreclose on the workers' homes. Lex remains determined. Clark tells Chloe about the explosion, and she agrees to drive him to the dance. They talk about Whitney's departure, and Chloe confesses her fear of being forgotten. Clark reassures her with a kiss just as Lana walks by. At the Talon, Nixon tries to get an interview with Clark, but Lex intervenes and warns Clark to stay away from him. Clark then tells his parents he suspects Nixon blew up the truck and saw the missing ship piece at Lex's. Unbeknownst to them, Nixon is eavesdropping and discovers the ship is in the storm cellar. He later steals the key from Lex's mansion. Lex visits Clark before the dance, helps him with his tie, and tells him their friendship will remain intact regardless of what happens. Whitney and Lana visit the decorated gym early and share a dance. Whitney tries to talk about their relationship, but Lana avoids the conversation. Chloe picks Clark up for the dance, and they exchange flowers. A storm is rolling in as they arrive. As they enter the gym, Lana and Whitney are leaving for the bus station. Whitney apologizes to Clark for past behavior and asks him to look after Lana. Lana gives Whitney her meteorite necklace for luck and promises to still love him when they reunite. In the storm cellar, Nixon uses the key, which floats into place and activates the ship. The Kents walk in just as the ship starts glowing. Jonathan confronts Nixon, who escapes into the storm with Jonathan chasing him. At the spring formal, Remy Zero performs. During a slow song, Clark and Chloe dance, and Chloe appreciates Clark finally being there for her. Just as they're about to kiss, the assistant principal announces a tornado warning with 3 funnels spotted south of town. Knowing Lana is heading there, Clark vanishes once Chloe turns away. Meanwhile, Lex realizes the key is gone and assumes Nixon took it. Lionel arrives and accuses Lex of using his mother's stock to fund the buyout. As they argue, the storm hits, shattering windows. A bookcase falls on Lex, injuring him, and a column pins Lionel. Lex frees himself but hesitates before helping his father, clearly debating whether to leave him or not, and this is where our first season ends.